Hey, Ron here. And today I want to talk about the divide between Bernie Sanders supporters and Joe Biden supporters. I want to talk about what Joe Biden supporters want, what the DNC wants, which is ultimately much more important, what Bernie Sanders supporters want, and why those things are mutually exclusive. Let's get to it. So, as I explained in my last scripted video, where I presented a pragmatic case for supporting Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden's base is really just the Democratic base. I don't know if I said it out right, but the Democratic Party rallied their base around Biden in order to fight off Bernie Sanders in the primary. We can also understand that, in a general sense, the goals of the Democratic base are the goals of the Democratic Party, whatever those goals are. And the goal of the DNC going into 2020 is, as best as I can tell, is to do the same thing that the Republicans have been doing to the Democrats, but to the Republicans. That is, they want to stall and reverse Republican victories and entrench Democratic power through the appointment of non-elected officials and especially through judges. Biden, in that context, is less someone with a plan and goals of his own, and more someone who will enable the Democratic Party to do the things that they want to do. And in that context, I don't think that he'll end up being that dissimilar from what Trump was to the Republican Party. Which is to say that the trouble with that plan isn't Joe Biden. The trouble with that plan is that the Democrats are really bad at opposing Republican policies. At least in part, because the Democrats and the Republicans both mostly draw on money from the same donors. The Democratic Party, in a society of the spectacle sense, their job isn't to help people. Their job is to make people feel like they're being listened to. Their job is to make people feel like their needs are being served in at least some capacity. And very straightforwardly, that just isn't cutting it anymore. People know that neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party are serving their interests. And they found a specific person who has not only fought for the things that they want for decades, but has promised to fight for them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I personally believe that it's appropriate. Appropriate is the word that I'll use. I believe that it's appropriate to think of Bernie Sanders supporters as a certain kind of single-issue voter. Let me explain. When you strip down all of the things that Sanders supporters want, healthcare reform, student debt reform, tax reform, welfare reform, even electoral reform, a very clear message comes out. The people who support Bernie Sanders want the economy to stop hurting them. And it can't be understated that the economy is hurting people, because Wall Street has decided that they need to squeeze every last drop out of that stone. They need to get as much money out of the poorest people in the country as they possibly can. That's why you're being charged $400 a month for insulin. That's why you have to pay $50 for a bottle of water and an aspirin at most hospitals in this fucking country. That's why paying $1,000 for this hunk of plastic isn't enough to keep it running. You have to pay another $50 a month. No one really controls the economy, but there are people who can influence it. And the people who are influencing it are using the economy to hurt people. And that needs to stop. And people know that that needs to stop because people aren't stupid. They know when they're being fooled, they know when they're being lied to, and most of the time they know who's doing it. I think it also needs to be understood that most of Sanders' proposals aren't really that radical. Most of these proposals, even the completely free healthcare, are things that are available in most of the European countries, most of the developed world. There's no reason we can't have this here, except for the incredible power that the dollar has over our political system. It also needs to be mentioned that none of the things that I mentioned before would be a silver bullet. None of the things that I mentioned before, the tax reform, the welfare reform, the student debt reform, none of those things would solve the problem of the economy hurting people just by themselves. The effect of all of those things individually would be very small. But even that small effect would mean a lot, especially cumulatively. Most people in this country, at least most people that I know and most people that I talk to in the real world and online, are barely living hand to mouth. They can barely keep themselves afloat. And now, with people needing to stay home due to the coronavirus, we're seeing people squeezed even tighter. I would go so far as to say that the real threat of the coronavirus isn't the virus itself, but the economic instability that's going to throw almost everyone in the country totally out of whack. And while that's happening, the assholes up in Washington are trying to figure out how they're going to bail out all these industries that have made it their business to make people suffer as much as they can. Those pricks in Washington would rather see you brought to the brink of destitution and poverty than threaten the well-being of their donors. And that's why we need major systemic reform. One thing can be avoided. One thing can be tunneled around. And we saw that with Obamacare. Remember how the Affordable Care Act was supposed to make everything better? How it was going to be a silver bullet to people suffering in poverty? Remember how that didn't work? Remember how before Obamacare things were bad, but now people are having to pay $500 for an EpiPen? It isn't one thing that's broken. It isn't one thing that's hurting people, because the economy isn't one thing. It is a vast, complicated system, and it needs to be reworked and reformed. Otherwise, we're all fucked. Now, if you're smarter than me, then you've already realized that there's a friction there. You can't have the Democrats conducting business as usual and have systemic reform at the same time. The major systemic reforms that Bernie Sanders is proposing, and that the people who support Bernie Sanders want, would necessarily prevent the excesses that allowed the GOP to do the things that they have been doing for the past 10 years. And blocking that systemic reform, maintaining business as usual, maintaining the status quo, would mean that the economy is still pushing people to the brink of destitution to the benefit of no one but a handful of rich donors. And the truth is that the DNC knows this. They have to know this. They're not stupid. And I'm not gonna go full on conspiracy mode and tell you that the DNC doesn't care about the well-being of anyone who votes for them. But I will tell you that the most important thing to the DNC is to bring back the status quo that they had when Obama was in office. But what the DNC either won't admit or won't acknowledge is that status quo never really existed. People have wanted change for decades. People wanted major systemic change and expected major systemic change when Bill Clinton was put into office back in 1994. People wanted major systemic change and expected major systemic change when Obama was put in office back in 2008. In both cases, they were lied to. In both cases, the candidates used the aesthetics of progressivism. They used the aesthetics of change to rally people to them. And now people know better, for absolute certain. And now these people like me even, have found someone, Bernie Sanders, who has fought for the very things that they've wanted for decades, since the 60s, and is promising to fight for them again now. And that's why that's why we are not buying what Joe Biden is selling. Because we know what we want. We know what we need at this point. And we are damn determined to get it. And if it's wrong for us to get the things that we need, if you consider that to be wrong, then get the fuck out! If you're not going to vote for Joe Biden in the primary, you're not wrong to do that. I'm not going to vote for him either. That was exhausting. Let's see if Editing Ron has anything to add that I missed. Unfortunately, yes, there is some more to say. Oh yeah, Editing Ron here at 11:59 p.m. on the Saturday that I really wanted to get this out. So, there's a thing that I wasn't sure I should mention in this video specifically. And I'm only putting it here because I couldn't avoid mentioning it in the video. So, you may have noticed that I was a little bit combative, that I was a little bit aggressive when talking about how the prices for medicines that people need to live are just a teensy bit fucking outrageous. Just a tiny bit exploitative. A reasonable person might suggest. And that's true, and I stand by that assertion. Medicine, especially really common medicines, are far too expensive. Things like insulin and EpiPens should not be fucking $600 a pop. That's outrageous. That's exploitative. That's literally putting a price tag that most people can't pay on their lives. But there's a thing that I see online, and it's a thing that I'm going to make a video about at some point. You see people, fucking liberals online especially, talking about how aggressive and how angry fucking people who support Bernie Sanders are. Christy Winters has a whole video about how she's never gonna vote for Bernie Sanders because his supporters are too mean to her, or they're too angry, and shit like that. And fucking... the thing is, or at least the thing that I think, is that the language of being menacing, the difference between being menacing and being pleading is all down to body language and tone. The words that you use are practically identical. And if that's the case, then you're going to read into those words what you want to read into them. So what's happening is that the people who support Bernie Sanders, especially over healthcare stuff, are pleading. They're saying that they don't want to be burdened with tens of thousands or even tens of millions of dollars of debt just by surviving. And these fucking liberals are saying that they're too mad, that they're being too angry, that they need to calm down. It's fucking exhausting. Like imagine you're bleeding out. Imagine you're fucking bleeding out, and you're shouting at someone, "I cannot feel my extremities, I need help right now," and the doctor comes up to you and says, "Okay, buddy, listen, we'll help you when you calm down." It's like, you prick, by the time I've calmed down, I'll be dead. I'll be dead. You'll have killed me. And it's not what the fucking liberals are trying to do. They're they're enforcing this civility politics. But I'm entirely certain, because some of these people are good people, like, Christy Winters is a good person. I'm not gonna talk shit about Christy Winters. But, like, fucking... she's wrong. You can't look at someone who has to pay fucking $400 a month for their supply of diabetes or become disabled for their whole fucking life and say, you need to calm down. We will give you medical treatment when you calm down, maybe. You can't look at someone who has to pay a fucking $40,000 for medicine to filter copper out of their bloodstream or something, and say to them, no, listen, you're being too aggressive. This is not as serious as you think it is. You need to calm down. People's lives are literally on the line, and people know that their lives are on the line. And you just don't... the fucking liberals don't believe them? It's absurd. Oh. I'm sorry this took so long. It just... my personal life has been... hectic, let's say. But, yeah. Got it done, finally. I think it turned out okay. I think that's everything I have to say, more or less. All said out. Regular links are in the description of the video. That's my Twitter, if you want to see what kind of goofing off I'm doing over on Twitter. Don't take Twitter seriously. Twitter is not a serious platform. That's my Curious Cat, if you want to ask me anonymous questions. Or if you want to send me harassment, go ahead and send me harassment. I'll just fucking delete it. I am the rocks of the eternal shore. Crash upon me and be broken. That's my email. If there is a leftist project that you think you think would inexplicably benefit from my participation, I don't know what kind of project that would be. Maybe you're making a top 10 worst bread tubers. I'd be willing to participate in that and explaining how I honed my technique to be as terrible as it is. There's also my Ko-Fi, if you think this rambling, meandering tirade is worth financially supporting. I want to emphasize that I don't want anyone to feel obligated to financially support this. I'm doing this because it's important to me. I went and I took my whole ass fucking computer 60 miles downstate so I could keep making videos. Nobody asked me to do that. I did that because I wanted to do that, because this is important to me. And I'm going to keep doing this because it's important to me. But every little bit does help. Even if it's just a little bit. Like, most of the time I'm using the money I get from Ko-Fi to buy groceries. I went out yesterday when we were toilet paper hunting and bought some groceries. So yeah. Next video... there are 2 videos next week. There's one that's already uploaded that has a release date. What one is that one? That's the one about peaceful resistance and the double standard. The video after that, the next scripted video... oh yeah, it's going to be about why you should vote in local elections. And that's going to be a bit longer than this one. It has 2 very lengthy parts. So yeah, until we get there, take care of yourselves, alright?